Today's YouTube video moment. It's been about a year or so since my last video, mostly because we had our first child, a boy, back in May, and so things have been pretty busy since then. But I thought I'd make a little video in the little spare time that I have today about some table saw maintenance items. This is a saw that I bought off of Craigslist, probably close to 10 years ago now. I think I paid like $100 for it. It's got the cast iron table saw wings, and it's a Sears Roebuck Craftsman. I think it's model 113. Yeah, 113. It's got a little one-horse motor on it. You know, it's not the greatest saw in the world. It's not cabinet saw quality by any means, but I have made quite a bit of furniture with it, and if you take your time setting it up, it's not a bad little machine. So there are a few things I wanted to cover. Let's start off with all the stuff that I'm going to be using today. We got a little bit of rust on the table from sitting in the woodshed all winter. We had, the cat has access to it, so she gets up on it sometimes with wet paws and whatnot, and you get a little bit of surface rust on the table. So we got some wet dry sandpaper here, some paste wax, a little WD-40. The other thing we're going to do is take a look at the blade alignment. On these, you want to make sure that your blade is running parallel to the ways in the table here, and so we'll use a square to check that, and it'll give you a fairly close adjustment. If you want something better, you can create up some sort of jig with a dial indicator that reads off the blade to get it within a thousandth of an inch or something. And then we'll take a look at one of probably the biggest issues with these Craftsman saws, and probably any other table saw for that matter, is the angle adjustment. You get a lot of real fine sawdust debris build up in there, and so that has to be cleaned out, both there and on the screw. If you've been using the saw for, 6 months at a time kind of thing, it probably needs to be done again, so clean it out and lubricate it. And for that we use a dry silicone lubricant. Probably any dry lubricant is okay. And we got a bottle of compressed air because I don't have compressed air in here. A big brush to brush things off. A little brush to brush little things off. And finally we're going to talk, well, I guess there's two more things. We'll talk about putting a new safety switch on. It has a nice big paddle stop. This is the setup that the previous owner had from 10 years ago, and I cleaned up the wiring a little bit, but I never really did anything about the switch. It's pretty poor in terms of safety, especially because it's underneath, so you need a free hand. You can't bump it with your leg to shut it off and whatnot. And then we'll quickly go over making up a zero clearance insert for your saw if you want to do something like that. That helps a lot with tear out if you're doing some fine woodworking stuff. Alright, so my first step is going to be to start by cleaning off all the, I guess they call these the trunnion here, at either end of the cast iron blade mount. These pieces on this saw, they appear to be cast aluminum. Your cabinet saws are going to be a little bit beefier with cast iron end pieces. And most contractor saws, the cast iron blade arbor mount is going to be mounted directly to the tabletop. So if you have to make adjustments, you're going to have to loosen the bolts on the trunnion that bolts it to the tabletop. Most of the cabinet saws will have the mount bolted directly to the base, and then the table will bolt separately onto the base, so you'll actually adjust the tabletop rather than the blade assembly. So first thing I do whenever you're doing maintenance on the table saw, unplug that power cord. Make sure you have it turned off. We're going to be checking blade alignment, so I want the blade to spin freely. So I'm going to remove the belt from the motor, and that's just loosen up the tension adjusting nut there. Pop the motor up and pop the blade off of it. There you can see the model number a little bit more clearly, perhaps. So then I clean off the forward side of the angle adjustment on both sides using my little brush to get in into that keyway there, if you will. I use the compressed air to blow out any sawdust that I break up, and then I spray a little silicone lubricant on it. I also do the forward positions of the screw at that point. The adjustment screw for the angle adjustment, if you can see. And then I'll unlock the angle adjustment, advance it forward, and then I'll clean the opposite end of them. And so we'll go through and we can clean up, just break up any sawdust. This end is a little bit harder to get to, you can see there, but there's that milled slot on the other side, or cast slot on the other side that the cast iron angle adjustment rides in. And after a while, really fine sawdust gets all caked up in there. This side you can see it a little bit better. So just clean off and break up all that sawdust, and there's a lot of it in there. And it gets to be pretty messy. And then after you clean both of those, clean off the screw on the bottom. That collects all the dust that you just knocked off everything else. You want to use a dry lubricant rather than WD-40 or something like that. I use a silicone spray. It'll just keep the dust from sticking to it, but again, you want to wait for that spray to dry. Otherwise, it really doesn't make any difference whether you use wet or dry. If you just go ahead and start using your table saw, well, that lubricant's still wet, stuff's going to stick to it anyway. So, yeah. The rest of the, the dust and the parts that's not critical here, I don't really, not worried about. But everything in the angle adjustment ways that you see there, you want to get that clean. Get the screw clean and the fittings around it clean. There's a lot of that dust. The sharper your saw blade, the less fine dust you'll have. You'll remove bigger chips. Ooh, that's getting cold. But that's how that goes, and I'll take my silicone spray and lubricate to the best of my ability the areas that I just cleaned off. And it's going to be probably tough to see, but just kind of like that. And then finally, there's some more dust on the threads down there. And if you want to do a real thorough job, you can go ahead and take all of this stuff apart, but I'm hoping that this is going to be enough to at least make my angle adjustment function again. Because it's been really tight lately, so if I can ease that up at all, and already it feels a lot easier to do. It was so bad that I actually broke the knob off here, and you can see I had to put a shoulder screw through the back of it here to hold everything in place. But once you get all that cleaned up, yeah, it's nice and smooth now. Let's see there how easy it moves. It should just move real nice like that, but I'm sure a lot of them out there don't. Alright, so once your angle adjustment's all cleaned up, the last portion to clean is your blade height adjustment, and that's just a worm screw type system that you can perhaps see right there. I'm sorry, it's not the brightest spot in the world. Dust it off and lubricate it. To get it in this position, I raise the blade full height. So you have access to it from the back side. Alright, so lubricate that. And then that brings a close to that portion of table saw maintenance. Next thing we're going to want to discuss is going to be turning the blade to the tabletop. The first step is going to be setting the blade perpendicular to the tabletop so that you can make accurate measurements on it. Now I like to use this drafter's square for my table saw setup, mostly because it has 1 degree increments in terms of angle for setting up more precise miters, but you can use whatever you want. A lot of people will use a T-square, or not a T-square, but whatever you want to call this square, a square. It's really the same kind of thing. So I like to use the skip tooth portion of the blade to set it up. Just make sure you're perpendicular. That's the biggest thing. Alright, once you have that portion of it, let's see if we get everything in the frame here. To check that your blade is parallel, this is the portion. You can use a jig with a dial indicator if you want. I know mine is already set up, so I'm okay with it. But I'll just use the square setup and make sure that the distance between this edge of the way and the table and the surface of the blade is consistent all the way across. Now you want to make sure that your let me reduce the blade height just a hair so that we spin freely. You want to make sure that your blade is true. If your blade isn't true or it's bent at all, you'll be able to measure that run out here as well. Mine's a little bit off, I guess. But that's another concern. So if your blade is bent, you want to keep your measurement at the same location on the blade every time, and obviously replace that blade as soon as you can afford to. This one here is okay, so that's going to be all I'm going to say about that. Okay, so this next portion is going to be about removing these rust marks from your cast iron tabletop. What I typically do, I'll use a 400 grit wet dry sandpaper, or maybe a little bit more coarse depending on how bad the actual rust is. And I'll use some WD-40 as a penetrating oil to break up that rust, and it'll just kind of fog the regions that that have any of the rust on them. And be careful not to get any into those adjustments that you just cleaned out and lubricated with the silicone, dry lubricant. And then I'll just take my wet dry sandpaper on those points and just kind of work my way around the table and clean those up till they're nice and smooth. It really doesn't take very long. You want to make sure that you get any dust off the table before you start this, because that just clogs the sandpaper if you have sawdust and stuff left over. So I took the compressed air and blew it off. Alright, so we're about 5 minutes into cleaning and polishing the table surface, and I think I'm to the point where I'm done with it. So I'm going to wipe all the WD-40 and dirt off the top of it now. I like to work in a kind of a circular motion when I do the polishing portion, rather than straight lines, just to try and keep it as even as possible. You can see there was a spot here where there was some rust a long time ago that's a little bit deeper, you know, and if you want to use some sort of special rust dissolver to get yours to some sort of mirror finish so you can shave on top of it, that's fine, but I don't have the time or the desire to go quite that far, and probably keeps the tabletop truer if you just remove it so that it's nice and smooth again. Some people will use like some sort of power polisher to get nice swirly patterns in there or whatever, but all I'm really concerned about is getting the top nice and smooth so my workpiece will slide over it cleanly, and also so that you don't get rust stains on your fine woodworking. Alright, so I also cleaned out the channel in here with the brush, compressed air, and then cleaned it up with the emery paper, wet dry sandpaper. I cleaned up the ways. I'm real careful in the ways just to try to clean up any rust on the bottom portion. I don't want to widen or distort them, producing extra slop in the tabletop. Alright, so now we're going to go through, we're going to clean the top off, get any remaining oil, and then we're going to apply a paste wax to it. So while I'm waiting for the paste wax to set up over there on the table saw, while I have all the stuff out here, I like to go do all the pieces with cast iron tops, so I just did the 14-inch bandsaw. The drill press, you know, doesn't really require it because you're not sliding stock on it. And before I leave, I'll get the Inca joiner planer as well. So you can see the kind of dull sheen. That means the wax is set up. And I'm just going to take and wipe it down, wipe any residue off, polish it out. You can see there's still quite a bit of dirt on there. Clean up the cutaway for the inset. Make sure you get all the wax and stuff out of there. And then that'll wrap up tabletop maintenance. Alright? Okay, now I'm going to say a short bit about zero clearance table insert. So you can see that this the factory insert here, which is made for both 90-degree perpendicular cuts as well as tilting the saw blade up to 45 degrees. So you have a wider opening in the insert. For doing some fine woodworking stuff, to reduce tear out, a lot of people like to have a zero clearance insert for which there is a very tight kerf right around the saw blade, used only for cuts perpendicular to the table. It reduces a lot of the tear out when you're cross cutting, and probably helps to keep the blade a little bit more stable as well during cuts. So to make this piece, the first thing to do is to measure the depth of or the thickness of the piece of material that you're going to need to make your zero clearance insert out of. So what I did was take my square, measure the depth. For the Craftsman one, I came out with 7/32 of an inch. You could use a depth mic to get something a little bit more accurate. So I found a piece of 7/32 stock. It's a phenolic resin, so it won't chip out or crack like acrylic or something that's more brittle. So it was a big sheet. I took my factory insert, just laid it on top, traced around it, cut it out on the bandsaw, brought it to the table. Before I did that, because it's only 7/32, I reinforced it with a piece of aluminum angle. The material had a little bit of a bow to it to start with, and so I need something to make that nice and flat. As you can see now, it sits nice and flat. Using the tabletop as a gauge is probably a good way to do it, because you know it's a nice flat surface. So using that, just tapped 3 632 machine screws with countersunk heads into that. I also drilled a 5/8 inch hole for your finger to go into, and then I brought it to the table and just used a hand plane to fit it to a nice snug fit. There's no magnets or anything. A lot of the ones that you buy from probably like Rockler or somebody like that are going to have some magnets that hold them in place. This one here is just a nice friction fit. And then you plug in your saw with your blade fully down, and then slowly raise it up to cut your entry cut into the zero clearance insert. And really that's all there is to it. It's a really nice piece once you're all done, and hopefully it'll improve the quality of your woodworking. Okay, so this is going to be the final portion of the table saw maintenance video that I'm working on. And this is going to be installing this paddle safety switch on my table saw, and it is going to be mounted right about there so that I can bump the stop with my leg if I need to stop it, in case I don't know, have a kickback or something like that, cut my arm off, I don't know, whatever. So I took the box that was on here off, and these are two-pole switches, so it switches, well, if you're running 220, it'll switch both legs, L1 and L2. If you're running 120, it'll switch L1 and your neutral. So both your black and white wires will be switched on the switch, whereas this one here, it's only switching your L1, your black power supply. I'm going to go ahead and pull this apart, and I'll be back with wiring information. Alright, I've got my switch box mounted. I had to go with a slightly deeper one because I had the shallowest of the boxes, the one that was on there. So I went with one slightly deeper. I moved it back. It was mounted here before. I moved it back a little bit so that it doesn't interfere with the fence rail. And I got my wiring all set up, so you can see the load side and the line side, and switching hot and neutral, and then my grounds are tied into the box, which is in turn tied to the saw, so everything's grounded. Alright, I'm going to go put the cover on this and screw it all together, and then we'll have a little bit of a test. Okay, I've got my new start-stop switch, safety paddle, all wired up, and let's give it a try. Oh yeah, don't forget to plug yourself back in. It ain't gonna work if you don't plug it back in. And now we'll go ahead and push the button.
we go.
Alright, so there you have it, our, I don't know, turned into about a 3-hour tune-up, but it shouldn't take you nearly that long, especially if you're not doing things like rewiring and whatever else. But yeah, good information on table saw maintenance. That's all for now.